Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about the features of Australian English. Okay, so start off first of all by giving yourself, let's say, 2 minutes. You can do this on your own or with a partner. I want you to list as many lexemes as you can think of that are uniquely Australian. So they might be words that don't exist, as far as you know, in other English-speaking countries or societies, or they also could be words that maybe do exist, but they have a particular or very specific different meaning in Australia. So pause, give yourself a couple of minutes. It might be also a good idea to share that with the group around you and see if you had any crossover or if there were any really different terms that you didn't pick up on that someone else did. Once you've finished that, come back to the slides. Alright, so lexical features. There are many lexemes still considered to be quintessentially Australian, despite them not necessarily being a part of people's active vocabulary. So quintessentially meaning in essence, or they're very, very much Australian. Many of these lexemes have their roots in 18th and 19th century British regionalisms that disappeared from English, but thrived in colonies. So start by thinking about the following lexemes: Billy, Fossick, fair dinkum, stone the crows, and cobber. So we've got a couple of expressions in there as well. I want you to see if you know what these mean. These are considered to be quintessentially Australian terms. However, you might not have heard of all of them. So see if you can give me a definition of each. The ones that you don't know, you need to look up, please, and pop them in your notes. Slang is very informal speech that's not standard in the specific language or dialect, which for us means that it's language that does not belong to standard Australian English. It's also typically transient. That means it doesn't always stick around, so it's kind of fleeting. Slang tends to be associated with particular groups according to factors such as region, personal interest, or age. Slang is exclusive in nature, as words will frequently have a meaning that's unrelated to their denotation. It can't be figured out by people who are not part of the in-group using it. So even if you think of highly technical scientific jargon, for example, you might not know what a word means, but if you know a bit about morphology and you know prefixes and suffixes, you should be able to work out the general meaning of quite a few words within that scientific jargon. However, slang doesn't have any kind of meaning that's necessarily connected to the morphemes, and sometimes the words that are used to create slang are completely irrelevant to the actual meaning of the word or phrase. So it can't be figured out in that sense, in the way that scientific words or words that we can kind of see where the process of that word's construction has come from might be able to be figured out. Slang doesn't really work like that. The main reason for the existence of slang is exclusion rather than efficiency. So slang is like a code that's used to signal the in-group solidarity. You can use slang to show that you belong to a particular group. Whereas for jargon, it definitely can be used to show in-group belonging, but it's also very much tied to efficiency. Slang is not so much tied to efficiency. As more and more people outside of a group understand the slang terms, those inside the group are less inclined to use it, and that's why slang changes so often. Okay, colloquialisms are another feature of Australian English. Colloquial language is informal language that demonstrates a relaxed and casual tone. They differ from slang as they're more permanent and tend to be widely understood. Many colloquialisms are considered to be a part of standard Australian English. They can consist of diminutives, contractions, and shortenings, as well as lexemes which include elided and vowel-reduced sounds, such as gonna for going to, wanna for want to, gotta for got to. Colloquialisms can also include informal uses of words where connotative rather than denotative meanings are intended, such as reckon means think or believe, but the denotation, if you look it up in the dictionary, is to establish by calculation, which is almost the opposite of what we would use it to express. Slab means a carton of beer to us, but its denotation in the dictionary is a thick, flat piece of stone. Colloquial language should be analysed in terms of the reduction in register that it causes. Casual language is inclusive and can serve to reduce the social distance between participants. Okay, another feature is idioms. Idioms are commonly used phrases with non-literal meanings. For example, out of the blue, meaning an occurrence that was unexpected. If you think about what out of the blue actually means, it doesn't have anything to do with occurrences or being surprised. It's just that over time we have grown to accept that that phrase means something that's unexpected. Expressions such as out of the blue become idiomatic because of how commonly they're used, generally in colloquial language. Idioms are highly dependent on cultural context, so they vary significantly between language varieties. The English idiom, a sandwich short of a picnic, is used to describe someone who is lacking in intelligence. And it can be translated to the Australian, a sausage short of a Barbie. Or we've also got a kangaroo loose in the top paddock. In Czech, the same meaning is communicated with it's splashing on their lighthouse, in Italian with little monkeys in the attic, and in Slovak to be left for vinegar. So to us, all of those meanings are completely irrelevant to the actual meaning of what you're trying to say. However, in those languages, they're widely accepted idioms. Okay, you need to pause here and complete this task. So go to page 188 of Living Lingo, the Blue Book. You need to read the 4 definitions of Standard Australian English and complete tasks A, B and C. When you finish that, come back to the video. Okay, so we're going to look at some grammatical features of Australian English now. We're going to start with pronouns. The plural second person pronoun forms you and you guys. So this is a list of examples of particularly Australian pronouns. Gender marking on both animate and inanimate nouns. So she's carked it when you're talking about a car. We're giving the item, the car, a gender. Decline of whom, which is now considered very formal, in favour of who in all varieties. So it's very rare to encounter whom, and when it is encountered, often it's used incorrectly because it's not really an enforced part of our language. A preference for object personal pronouns like me over the subject pronouns like I, following than. So he's bigger than me instead of he's bigger than I. The demonstrative them in place of those. For example, one of them things instead of one of those things. The possessive me in place of my. For example, that's me book. Object forms in reflexive pronouns. I thought to myself, and in coordinated pronouns, me and Fred, or Fred and me, are coming to. Us in place of me, especially after verbs of giving and receiving. For example, give us a light for me, Siggy. So there we've got the use of us and also me. Extended use of myself in place of me or I. Please contact John or myself if you have a question, when really it probably should be, please contact John or me if you have a question. Okay, verbs and verb phrases. So we have a greater use of ing progressive. So I am enjoying English language instead of saying I enjoy English language. There's been a general rise in the use of the ing morpheme since the second half of the 20th century. There's a widespread and growing use of the present perfect in simple past contexts. So for example, then she's broken her leg instead of saying then she broke her leg. Have deletion. For example, I only been there a couple of times instead of I have only been there a couple of times. The increasing use of in place of have after the modal verb forms could, should and would. So for example, I could have gone earlier instead of it should be I could have gone earlier. The continued demise of shall, which has been pushed out by the modal verb will. So will I call a taxi instead of shall I call a taxi. Please put all of these in your notes. The increasing use of may and might, which is unmarked for tense, so we're not changing it according to the tense that it's in. Both indicate past possibility and hypothetical possibility. For example, I think he may or might come. Modal use for better and gotta in place of had better and have got to. For example, we better go instead of we had better go. The growing use of the get passive. For example, he got arrested versus he was arrested. So we're more likely to say he got arrested. The continued normalizing of irregular verbs. For example, show to showed and shine to shined, pushing out, shown and shone. Fixed past tense forms for the verb be. So you was late again, of course they was. Okay, so instead of conjugating the verb to be according to the pronoun that's being used, so we would say that you were late again is the correct term, but it's becoming increasingly accepted to just use was for everything. The singular there construction with plural subjects. So for example, there's fairies at the bottom of my garden, whereas it really should be there are fairies, not there is. Increased use of gotten, especially in intransitive constructions. So she's gotten really angry, whereas if we're not using it in this context, we would say she has become really angry. The revival of the mandative subjunctive. For example, I insist that he arrive at 9 o'clock in place of I insist that he arrives at 9 o'clock. So again, we're looking at just a different use of tense. Okay, other grammatical features. These features are to do with negation, clause combining, and discourse structure. So don't in place of the standard doesn't. For example, he don't go here instead of he doesn't go here. Some use of ain't as an all-purpose negative auxiliary for be and have. So for example, he ain't happy. Instead of, we would probably say it should be, he is not happy. Double negation. So I never said nothing. Negation means like making things negative. So saying there isn't any of something or you know, something to do with not having things. So I never said nothing, whereas it should be I didn't say anything. So never and nothing contradict each other there. Never as a general negator. For example, you never opened it. The invariant negative tag isn't or in it. So invariant meaning it doesn't change according to who's speaking or who's being spoken to and according to tense. So you're going home soon, in it. The relative clauses with zero marking for subjects. For example, I knew a girl lived down the street versus I knew a girl who lived down the street. The use of the connective which, especially in speech, unless you get an ATAR of 90, which some universities require. Whereas we might say, unless you get an ATAR of 90, that some universities require. Sentence final hedging but. So for example, he's a bit of a bastard but. Basically, it just means putting but on the end of sentences. All right, morphological features. Diminutive. So diminutives are words that are shortened to one syllable with an additional suffix added. So in English, in Australian English, it's either IE or can be written as Y as well, or O. For example, after brekkie, we got a good posie in front of the telly and opened our Chrissy Prezzies from the rallies. Or if we're thinking about the O morpheme, my mate Jacko, a weirdo journo from Freo, slipped on a bit of lino during his smoko and ended up in an ambo. Poor Dara couldn't get compo. Linguists describe how these shortened expressions are a reflection of cultural values such as informality, mateship, and egalitarianism. I want you to have a think about, do you think that the use of these diminutives, does that actually reflect the values of informality, mateship, and egalitarianism? I want you to decide whether you think it does or doesn't and write a very short paragraph about why you think that is. Once you finish with that, come back to the video. Alright, so we're into phonological features now. We're going to talk about the rhotic R. So the rhotic R is the R sound that we associate with American English. So for example, in car, it's the really sharp, or the very rounded R sound. It's also used in Canadian, Scottish and Irish Englishes, as well as some regional dialects in England. Australian English, however, is non-rhotic, and that means that we do not pronounce the R sounds at the end of words like father or where it occurs before a consonant, like in the word cart. So hear how when I pronounce cart, you actually don't hear the R sound at all. If we make that a rhotic R, it would be cart, and automatically it sounds like I have at least a vaguely American accent. Basically, for an R to be pronounced in Australian English, it must be followed by a vowel, such as in the word racket. Okay, another phonological feature is the vocalized L. The pronunciation of L in Australian varieties is distinct from other languages. We pronounce it with the tongue further back in the mouth than many other varieties of English, such as British and American, and there's a tendency for it to be vocalized. That is, for it to be pronounced kind of like a vowel. You can hear it in words like milk and hill. Okay, so you could, particularly if you think about milk, it doesn't really have a proper ul sound. So listen to me saying it again just normally like I would, milk. Now this is with the vocalized L, milk. Sorry, the unvocalized L, milk. So I want you to practice saying the L sound normally, like you normally would, and then try pronouncing it with the tip of your tongue much further towards the ridge of your teeth, and that should give you an indication as to what it sounds like. Okay, we also have a weak T. Australian accents tend to weaken stops such as T. It can be seen in the following ways. It could be flapped, where the T is pronounced like a D, where it occurs between vowels. For example, 13, city, instead of 13 and city. It could be glottalized, where the sound is briefly articulated between the vowels. For example, bottle or bottle. So where the T is replaced by a glottal stop instead of bottle. And unreleased, where the speech organs come together but don't part to make the little explosion that characterizes a stopped consonant. For example, bit or bid. Okay, they sound very, very similar instead of bit and bid. Okay, another phonological feature is affrication. An increase in the affrication of tr and str results in words such as tree being pronounced tree. Okay, so instead of tree, we have tree. Another phonological feature is yod dropping. So the phoneme which we kind of represent as our J is called yod. So if we drop that, we have yod dropping. So that's where the name comes from. So it tends not to be dropped after alveolar consonants before U. For example, news versus news. There is some variation with this. So how do you pronounce the word nude? I pronounce it in the way that I just did, nude, but you would perhaps find older people who might pronounce it as nude. We also have H deletion. So the deletion of the H sound is common in function words such as him and her, but in content words, for example, helmet and happen, it remains stigmatized and tends to occur more at the broad end of the spectrum. And it's also more commonly found in male speech. So for example, saying, I gave it to him, or gave it to her, is far more accepted than, can you put on your helmet? Okay, we really judge people and we have this idea that we require H sounds to be pronounced in content words, but it is far more accepted to drop that H sound in a function word. We also have mixed fricatives. So we have the substitution of the F sound for th. For example, think instead of think, and V for the th sound. So mother for mother. It's actually more widespread than we think. This feature is fairly historically recent, so it doesn't have such a long-standing history of use, but it is becoming more common. We also have schwa. So the schwa vowel is used in a wide range of unstressed contexts. For example, rabbit, boxes, and comma all have schwa in the second syllable. Schwa differentiates the rhythm of English from languages like French, Italian, and Spanish. There is evidence that schwa has been used in English since the development of Old English. So it means that if you think about rabbit, you can hear towards the end of the sound I'm saying rabbit. It's more of an sound instead of rabbit. All right, the loss of diphthongs. Diphthongs in Australia are often pronounced as a single vowel. For example, monophthongal pronunciation of words such as poor, more, and sure, instead of poor, more, and sure. Many speakers are also producing monophthong variants for the centering diphthongs, such as in near and square. So basically it means that the vowel sounds are produced as one sound rather than as two, being articulated in two different places in the mouth. All right, we also have connected word processes, which we've touched on quite a few times before, so you should be pretty familiar with. We have assimilation, for example, in pancake instead of pancake. Vowel reduction, such as police instead of police, or terrific instead of terrific, and basin instead of basin. See, it's so natural that it's often hard to actually unreduce your vowels. And in elision, so in things such as old man instead of old man, and ham and eggs instead of ham and eggs. We also have insertion, such as in film instead of film. That one's probably a little bit more outdated. You might be more likely to hear people of an older generation using insertion in that particular kind of context. All right, we're on to spelling features. Australian orthography, meaning spelling and the way that the words are kind of visually presented, is predominantly similar to that of Britain, with some features associated with American English as well as some alternatives. For example, centre and theatre, British, because we have the RE the RE spelling instead of ER. Defence, licence and program, we use the American. Okay, so defence, British would be an S, an S instead of the C, and same for licence, and then program would be double ME for British, that we don't use those, we use the American versions. We also use colour, labour and naturalise, for example. Those ones are pretty interchangeable. We accept in Australian English, we would accept both. Australian writers tend not to rigidly adhere to one or the other, and both British and American spellings are acceptable in Australia. All right, that takes us to the